Hey, everybody. Thank you for listening to the Startup Sense podcast. This is your host, Jonah Lupton, and we have a wonderful episode for you today. Today, we're going to be speaking with Zach Supalla. He is the co founder of a company called Particle. The website is particle.io. And basically, what they've built is a platform to connect IoT devices. And we're going to talk more about what that means. Company's based in San Francisco, approximately 35 employees, 35 or 45, I forget. They've raised about $14.5 million. And let's welcome Zach. Zach, how are you, man?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. What was that employee number? Was it 35 or 45?
35.
35. Perfect. So tell us about yourself first, before we talk about the company, kind of how did you get into this and what were you doing before you started Particle?
Yeah. So I started my career in business. I was a management consultant working for McKinsey & Company. I have an MBA, and I started while I was in business school. And I think I'm not the typical sort of business founder. When I started the company, I decided it was important that I learn to be technically competent. And so I spent a lot of my time in business school learning to code and figuring out how to do like front end development, build websites, and electrical engineering, everything like that. Originally, the product we were building wasn't a platform like it is today. We started out building a connected lighting product and under a former name, which was Spark. So we launched a product on Kickstarter called the Spark Socket that was a way to connect your lights to the internet so they could be controlled through an app or through an API, and you could build other applications to interact with those lights. That Kickstarter campaign was unsuccessful. And after it closed, we sort of looked around and said, okay, what did we do here? What did we do well? What did we do poorly? And we realized that a lot of other companies were trying to build products like this, and they were struggling with the technical challenges. So we sort of ripped the guts out of our own product to resell as a platform, and did a second Kickstarter campaign for a development kit 6 months later in 2013. And that went very well. We had a $10,000 goal for that Kickstarter campaign and raised almost $600,000. And that put us on the path that we're on today.
Awesome. So $600,000, how did you guys allocate that money? What did that go into?
So most of it went into manufacturing. So I think roughly speaking, it cost us probably about $400,000 to actually purchase the components, manufacture the devices, and ship them to customers. And so then we had $200,000 left over, and that went to paying employees. At that time, I wasn't yet making a salary, neither was my co-founder. So we were just hiring people with the money. And then we started to raise more money. Eventually, we started to pay ourselves salaries and of course, grow the team much more substantially.
So how is your and maybe talk to the audience about what exactly is an IoT device?
Yeah. So basically, there's a lot of companies out there right now designing physical products connected to the internet. And when we think about what the Internet of Things is, it's a sort of confusing term because it lumps all of these industries together into one category. But it's basically anything that's internet connected that's not a computer or a phone. And it ranges from smart home products like connected lights or appliances like refrigerators or coffee makers. It includes things like the connected car. In a more industrial environment, it includes things like industrial automation, where you're connecting machines to the internet and having them controlled remotely through a central service. It includes things like in municipal applications, so like cities, you have parking meters that are connected, so they can report when the parking spot has someone in it or not, and they can do like remote billing. It includes asset tracking, so like where is my 18-wheeler, where is my shipping container, where is my bicycle. It includes garbage collection, smart garbage cans that tell you whether they're empty or full, and so waste management knows which ones to empty and which. So there's like a ton of stuff in this industry. And we provide underlying technology. So the hardware that goes in the device that connects it to the internet, the software that runs in the cloud, and the software in between the device and the cloud. So communication protocol, security, all that stuff we provide for those companies.
Are you guys more focused on any of those industries, whether it be consumer, commercial, industrial?
So early days, we were really focused on consumer because we started specifically with Wi-Fi connected products. And so then we're building products that have Wi-Fi networks, which generally means your home. Sometimes it's commercial applications because offices have Wi-Fi networks too. But you usually have an IT guy in the way who really doesn't like these weird devices connecting to his or her network. So the home applications were really where we started. And so we saw things like appliances and leak detection systems for your basement. So if your pipe bursts so you don't flood your basement, we saw pet toys, we saw gardening systems. And then we added support for cellular connectivity. And when we did that, that pulled us much more into the industrial world. So we started doing things like tracking 18-wheelers or packages or, connecting industrial equipment. And so these days, we spend most of our time in the industrial world because the consumer stuff is still kind of struggling to take off. And I think consumer IoT is going to be really big 5 years from now, but it's just not there yet. And so in the meantime, we're spending most of our energy on the other side of the market.
Gotcha. Okay. I mean, because I got to believe that even on the consumer side, the smart home, I mean, it sounds sexy. Certainly the really geeky, techie people love it. But I would still think overall, it's just a micro fraction of, how many homes are out there, right? I mean, how many, like the percentage of homes that are smart homes, it's got to be well under 1%, I would think.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think the reason for that is a lot of the products are gimmicky and they just don't add that much value to your life. And you see this with smart lighting, for instance, which is where we started. It's not really usually all that smart. You have a connected light bulb like a Philips Hue. We've moved the light switch from the wall into your pocket. So now you can take out your phone to control your lights. But most of the time, taking out your phone to control the lights is much more of a pain than just flipping the light switch. So it's like, why are we doing this? What's the point? I actually think one of the things that's really starting to change this is the voice assistants. So Amazon Alexa, Google Home. Now we have a really good interface for all the smart home stuff. Like if I can tell my Alexa, which I do, turn on my lights, that's actually really useful.
Right. Make me a coffee, all that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So what I'm expecting happens now is like we're going to spend the next 2 or 3 years really improving the experience of the voice assistants and making it a much more powerful UI for interacting with all the smart home stuff. And then once that's really well solidified, then that gives the opportunity for all these smart home products to grow up, interacting with the primary interaction being through the voice.
Gotcha. So take us back to the beginning. So you guys raised $600,000 in crowdfunding. When did you guys raise an official, outside round from investors?
So when we did our crowdfunding campaign, so we're now in May of 2013, we raised the $600,000. We had enough money to get through to manufacturing, but we also had a bunch of momentum. We were very visible at the time. We were being covered in a lot of different publications. And so I was in Minneapolis at the time. That's where we were originally based. We're now based in San Francisco. And so I started flying to San Francisco, meeting with investors to see, hey, are you interested in this? And most of the investors said, looks cool, super interesting, but come back when you've shipped your product. We're not really interested in investing in a company that still hasn't figured out like how to manufacture a product. And that's not where we want our money going. And there was one investor that said, no, actually, I really want to get in now because I think there's a lot I can do to help. And his name is Avidan Ross. He runs a fund called Root Ventures that does specifically connected hardware. So he was really our first institutional investor. He put in like $300,000 at around the same time of the Kickstarter campaign. And then he helped us prep for our next round of funding, which was our seed round that we did in like the spring of 2014. So end of 2013, we shipped our product. We had 10,000 of these development kits out in the world. We had 5,000 customers. We were starting to get interest from companies that were developing products that they wanted to ship at scale. And that was really our story, is like we're distributing these development kits to help identify customers who we can support with large scale deployments of IoT products. So they started to show up, and then we took that momentum and brought it back to investors and said, hey, here's what's going on. We shipped our product. Our hypothesis about where our business was going to go is starting to play out. So we're raising a round. We raised about $4 million then, and then continued to grow and build out the enterprise side of the business. And then we just raised a Series A last year. It was about 10 million.
Okay. So you guys have been at this for a few years, at least 4 or 5, I think, total from when you probably started with Spark.
Yeah.
What's been 2 or 3 of the biggest challenges for you and how did you guys overcome those?
So early days, a lot of the challenges were, as with a lot of hardware startups, was just like manufacturing. Like, how do you actually take this design and make 10,000 things that all work? And how do you get them into customers' hands?
Yep.
And the stuff, especially with a Kickstarter campaign, you have international customers. I mean, for some reason, everything gets stuck in German customs. Germany does not like products to come into their country. So you talk to hardware entrepreneurs, everybody gets stuck with this, and everybody has to figure out.
Meaning, if you're trying to ship your product into Germany, it's a disaster?
Yeah, every single time. It gets stopped at the border, and they're like, what is this? And you have to like convince them that this is a real product that's, with like well-intended customers.
Right.
And so, there's all these logistical challenges of setting up manufacturing operations. That was a lot of our problems early days. After that, and that just comes with practice. You do it once. It's super painful the first time.
This is Jonah Lupton, founder of the Lupton Group and host of the Startup Sense podcast. Are you struggling to find the right tech team to build your company's website or mobile app? Maybe you've developed a product but need help with your go-to-market strategy, including branding and marketing. Well, stop worrying, because my team at the Lupton Group can assist you with all of those needs. We specialize in helping entrepreneurs and startups of all sizes launch and grow their businesses. For a free consultation, you can email me at jonahlupton@gmail.com or visit our website at luptongroup.co. Well, how did you guys set up manufacturing the first time? I mean, did you hire a company to help you do it?
We lived in Shenzhen. So we did an accelerator program called Hacks that's based in Shenzhen. And it's designed for American and European startups to go to China and live there for 4 months to like figure out how to engage with Chinese manufacturers. So we did that. And that's really what like taught us how to build a supply chain. And then one of the guys on my team, Will, spent the next year living in China and like set it up himself. And he was in the factory working alongside the other factory workers, testing devices. Like he was doing the whole thing. And it took us a year to get good at it. And then we started to hire full-time people in China who had experience. We hired someone to oversee manufacturing. We hired somebody to oversee sourcing. We hired an engineer over there who could help on the manufacturing line with like testing. And once we had that in place, then it all got easy. So now we manufacture large quantities on a regular basis. It's sort of trivial. There's a lot of work that goes into it, but we're good at it now.
Just to put things into perspective, from the beginning, if you had tried to set up that manufacturing in the U.S., would it even have been feasible? Are there even manufacturing facilities in this country that could have done that work? And how much more expensive would it have been?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so we really wanted to figure this out because there's a lot of demand for American-made products. And so we wanted to say, like, let's see if we can manufacture this stuff in the U.S. So here's the numbers. Our first product, which we don't sell anymore, it was called the Spark Core. That was our first development kit. We were selling it for $40. And our cost for each unit was $14. So that was good because it left enough money for us to profit and also for us to sell it through like distributors and wholesalers and give them some profit as well. So good numbers. So our manufacturing partner is a company called AQS. AQS has a factory in Shenzhen and they also have a factory in Fremont, California. So we're like, great, we can ask them to quote the price if we manufacture in Fremont, and we can see exactly where the price difference comes from if we manufacture in China versus in the US. So we asked for a quote. What if we manufacture this in Fremont? And the quote came back as $35, which is not viable because they're selling it for $40. There's only $5 of profit there. It's not enough for us and for wholesalers. So that wasn't going to work. But actually what was interesting was where the cost difference came from. Because I think usually people would assume, well, the labor rates are different, right? American labor costs more than Chinese labor, and so that's what drives the price. So when we ask for quotes, we always ask for a full breakdown of the cost, components and labor and testing and all this stuff. Labor was only $2 of the increment. So if the only difference was labor cost, it would have been $15 instead of $13, and we totally could have done it. But then there's another $20 of extra cost. So where does the $20 come from? It comes from the fact that the same components when purchased in the US, cost a lot more than when you buy them in China.
Hmm.
And these are commodity. I'm talking like chips, right? Like resistors and capacitors and
Where, where are those components made?
In China.
Oh, okay.
So this is the problem. The whole supply chain is now designed around Chinese operations, and because everyone sort of already outsourced everything to China, if you still manufacture in the U.S., the sort of assumption through the supply chain is you must not be very price sensitive because why else would you manufacture in the US? And so everybody charges more money through the entire supply chain to American companies than they do to Chinese companies. Now, of course, we're not a Chinese company, but when we manufacture in China, we're not the ones buying the components. It's our Chinese manufacturers that do. So they get cheap prices that the same manufacturer, when manufacturing in US, doesn't get.
Gotcha.
And so it's like, it's not just the labor price. It's sort of the whole supply chain and value chain and like the way the entire economy of designing and manufacturing hardware works just is all optimized around Chinese manufacturing now. And you really can't do this stuff in the US.
Do you think it's ever going to change, or just going to keep getting more and more expensive to bring manufacturing over to the US?
It's a good question. I mean, I think that, and I also think it's so when we've had customers that have said, well, that's not okay. You guys need to manufacture in the US. My argument is, look, I have 35 employees. Most of them are in the US. Most of the value that we're creating is American value. Like the number of extra employees that our manufacturers hired because of our business is probably like 2. So it's like at the end of the day, what's happened is we're sort of outsourcing some of our supply chain to China, but all the value added parts, designing the software and working with customers and sales and marketing, like that's all in the US, and those are where the best jobs are. So I think at the end of the day, that's always going to happen is different countries are going to get better at different things, and we can create a lot of value by working together. And then in the US, what that means is if you do manufacturing, in this case, electronics manufacturing, there are certain markets where you can focus your energy. So like US manufacturers for electronics tend to focus on medical devices because the quality expectations are so incredibly high that you really need like a vertically integrated supply chain all in the same city so you can manage the quality. Or like government contracts where the US government requires that the whole supply chain be American. And so, and they're willing to pay extra for that privilege to have an American supply chain. So if you're building stuff for government applications, then you can still do it in the US. And so the electronics manufacturers just focus on those specific areas and still find that opportunity, but it just takes a different form.
Right. I mean, I tell everyone the manufacturing may happen in China, but the executive jobs, the sales and marketing jobs, the customer support jobs, the finance jobs, that's all happening in the US. And without the Chinese manufacturing, those jobs wouldn't exist because the company couldn't. I mean, you guys would have to be selling your product for 2 to 3 times what you were with the if you had to move everything over to the US. So
exactly. And manufacturing something like these circuit boards is so highly automated. Like it's basically a robotic line. And who cares if it's a Chinese robot or an American robot? Like it's a robot, it's not a job. And there's like 2 people who will be overseeing these machines as they assemble our products. And so we'll manufacture like 10,000 devices, and it happens in like 48 hours with 2 people looking at it. It's like there's not a lot of job there,
Right. That's not a lot of missed income in the US.
Right.
Talk to us about who are some of the biggest clients that you guys work with right now, and how they've been using your platform to grow their product line or enhance what they have.
So Keurig is one of our customers. They're a company that makes coffee makers and single pod coffee makers, and they also make the K-Cups. So they wanted to understand how people consume coffee, which is funny because like companies who make products like that don't necessarily know what the actual coffee drinking experience is. And so they distributed a bunch of connected coffee makers to customers who volunteered to have their data collected in exchange for free coffee. And they learned a lot about what what the consumption patterns look like, what size brews. You have Keurig has different buttons you can press for like bigger or smaller coffees. So they actually learned which buttons people press. They didn't know. So they got a lot of value out of that. So that's one customer. We have a customer named Granger who does distribution for industrial products, and their application is under wraps, so I can't share a lot of details, but they're basically trying to improve quality on manufacturing lines and warehouses. We work with a company called Briggs Healthcare, which just is recently rebranded to Smart Health. They're working on a product coming out later this year that'll be distributed through big box retailers. We have customers who do medical devices, so like sleep apnea devices that are connected through our platform. We have companies who are measuring methane emissions on oil rigs. We have customers who are trying to detect leaks on fuel tanks underneath gas stations. So it's all sorts of kinds of customers. And what's interesting about it is, from our perspective, it's really hard to identify those opportunities just sitting in a room and trying to make them up, right? Like you wouldn't know who to sell to. And so there's obvious ones like connected car, right? But the obvious ones end up with a million companies competing for that opportunity. Whereas because we distribute these development kits and companies end up building prototypes on our platforms, we don't have to say what they're for. We just say, here's a thing for connecting something to the internet via Wi-Fi. And then our customers come to us and say, well, here's the problem I'm trying to solve. And I'm building these prototypes. I'm moving grain. I'm responsible for moving grain from a farm co-op to a customer. And along the way, the grain dries out, and we're trying to figure out where it dried out. Did it dry out in the truck? Did it dry out on the train? Did it dry out in the grain silo, so that we can figure out where the problem's coming from and we can fix the problem? So we need sensors that can detect whether the grain is dry or not. And it's like, that's a super interesting application. I never would have come up with that. So it's really good that you came to us to talk about this rather than us trying to find you.
So how do they find you?
So it usually happens. That's a good question. So I think generally the way this has worked is we really just focus on making something great for engineers and developers. So these development kits are really cheap. You can buy them a million different places. You can buy them on our website. You can buy them on Amazon. You can buy them from companies like SparkFun and Adafruit and Seed Studio, which are like modern day Radio Shacks on the web. And so people just kind of Google, like, I'm trying to build a such and such with Wi-Fi. How do I do that? And they end up finding Particle, or maybe they ask friends and their friends tell them about Particle. They end up building a prototype. Usually what happens is they build a prototype, and we're not chatting with them like this is all self-service. So they go on our website, they buy a thing, it gets shipped to their door, they build a prototype. Maybe they hang out in our forums and talk to other engineers about how to build it. And then at some point they decide they get the budget to go from 10 prototypes to 1,000 unit pilot. And then there's a bunch of questions they have about how to go from 10 to 1,000. And then they contact us and they say, okay, we're going big here. Like, what do we do now? And that's where our sales team kicks in and sort of helps them figure out the opportunity and figure out what resources they need and how we can help them sort of go through that journey from prototype to production.
Have you heard any really cool stories from any inventors that have used your developer kit to create something and then turned that something into a company?
Yeah, so we have a lot of startup customers. So one of my favorites is a company called Clever Pet. Clever Pet makes a smart dog feeder. It's probably the best way to frame it. And so I'll sort of paint a picture for this. So you have a dog who's at home, waiting for you to get home, and maybe is separation anxiety, maybe is ripping up your couch in frustration because you're not home. So you get one of these Clever Pet things. It's like, maybe it's like a sort of bulbous white thing. It's like a foot in diameter, kind of round. And it feeds your dog one kibble at a time. And it's also a game. So it has these pads that light up in the front, and it's sort of like a game of Simon or Dance Dance Revolution for your dog. So like the pads light up, and then the dog presses one of the pads, and then the treat comes out. And as the dog starts to figure this out, they start to do this more and more, right? Like, oh, I get it. I'm supposed to press the pad, and then the treat comes out. Well, now once your dog has figured it out, the game gets harder. So now one of the 3 pads will light up, but just one of them, and your dog has to press the one that's lit up, and then it gets the treat.
Now, make your dog smarter too.
Oh yeah, exactly. That's why it's called Clever Pet. So now, like 3, there'll be a sequence. Like the first one will light up, and then the third one will light up, and then your dog has to press the first one, and then the third one, and then it gets his treat. And the game keeps getting harder as your dog gets smarter. And this keeps your dog engaged. So instead of ripping up your couch, your dog is working on its game. And then they use internet connectivity to push to collect information about what your dog is doing. So, and tell you, like, here's where your dog is progressing through this series of challenges, and also to push new software updates. So as they develop more complex games, they can on the fly sort of change what's running on the Clever Pet. So these, the guys who did this are super cool. It's a pair of founders. Their names are Leo and Dan. They were PhDs at UCSD. One of them studied animal cognition. One of them studied neuroscience. And so they're exactly the kind of people you want running a company like this, because they know how brains work, and they know about conditioning, and they know about like animal brains. But they're not necessarily engineers, right? I mean, they've become engineers over time, but they needed something that was really easy to use. They could prototype. And then once they prototyped, they wanted to figure out the fastest way to get from first prototype to delivering this to originally their Kickstarter backers, and then to a broader set of customers. And they've done that now. So they're a perfect example of like inventor who is able to get this product to market because of what Particle does for them.
Now, in order for, to build the Particle platform, you needed to hire some very smart people. Typically, very smart people already have jobs.
Yep.
So how do you convince them? What's been your recruiting strategy, or what tip or trick, could you share with us that's helped you recruit really, really smart people to work for your company, to obviously leave whatever company they were with to come help you build your company?
So a couple different things. One is, for engineers, I think we have an easier time than a lot of companies because we make an engineering tool. People love building products for themselves or for their peers. And so engineers who might be making a consumer product or making an app or something like that, look at what we do and say, oh, that's really cool. I want to do that. That looks like fun. And so we're able to recruit great engineers who want to work on hard problems and want to solve problems for other engineers. Also, we end up with a lot of people who like sort of fall in love with Particle because they're customers, and they really like our stuff, and then they want to work here. And so that also helps out a lot. On the business side, it's a little different because the product isn't necessarily designed for a business user. So like it's not naturally compelling in the same way. But I think what gets them excited is the fact that this is a really new industry and there's a lot of problems to solve. It's not exactly clear how the Internet of Things is going to play out over the next 10 years. Like I look at where we are as sort of the Commodore 64 days of IoT, where like it would have been really hard to, in the late 70s or the early 80s when Commodore 64s were all the rage, to predict the Internet. Right. Or even when the web sort of first got off the ground and we all had, we're all downloading Netscape for the first time, it would have been really hard to predict Amazon.com.
Right. Or when I got my first Nintendo, when I'm playing Mario Brothers, thinking it's the coolest thing ever, to think what we have now with, what gaming has come to and virtual reality. And it's
exactly.
I never would have predicted it. I mean,
I just got a PS4 after, like, I was super into video games when I was a kid, and then like I sort of went on like an 8-year hiatus, and then I just got a new video game console, and I was like, holy crap, this stuff got awesome in the
plus the TVs. I mean, right? 25 years ago, I'm playing video games on a little 13-inch TV in my bedroom.
Right.
And now people are playing video games on 65-inch flat screens.
Right. So it's kind of the same thing. Like we don't really super know how this is going to play out. And for the right kind of business person, which is really the type that we want to hire, that's a fascinating problem, right? Like to sort of help try and define what this industry is going to become. And so that's, I think, appealing. And then besides those things, we also work really hard to make this a great place to work. I think that that's one of the things that a startup can do better than a larger company is create a lot of autonomy and empowerment, and the sense that what you're doing is important, and that what you're doing directly relates to the outcome of the company. So you feel less like a cog in a wheel and more like a key member of a team. And I think we've done a good job of creating a culture where that's true.
You guys have raised about $15 million. Could you have bootstrapped this company if you wanted to, or just because of the hardware, software component, you really needed to raise money? I mean, there's no way to grow a company without raising money.
I think we could have bootstrapped a business. I don't think it would be the same business that we have today. We started out making development kits, and we made development kits because they were sort of a way to test a market and to learn about what customers are building, and to build over time a SaaS platform. We could have bootstrapped the business if it were just dev kits. Because like we made money on dev kits pretty quick. That business grew pretty fast. But then we had to invest a lot of time and energy into building an enterprise platform. And that takes a couple years of work before you start getting customers. And having that kind of patience requires funding. So I think if we were bootstrapped, we would just be a different kind of company, and we'd be a smaller company with kind of a lower ceiling on the opportunity that we have in front of us.
So as entrepreneurs go out to raise money, I mean, sometimes they're desperate. They need capital to continue operations, to grow, to compete, etc. So they're willing to take a check from anybody. But that's one of the concerns. Other times, entrepreneurs have, they have traction, they have a great team, they're able to be a little bit more selective and make sure they're picking the right investors that can add value. So talk to us about kind of how did you find the right investors, and how are those investors adding value today?
Yeah. So, I think that I got lucky. Our first big investor, Avidan, that I mentioned earlier, he found us, and he was he knew exactly what we were doing. The first time I met him, he got it. Like, he told me what our strategy was,
Is he an engineering, techie kind of guy?
Yeah. And he's pretty uncommon. And that experience, I think, is pretty uncommon. But there's some amount of like, he found us, he found us because we were shouting about what we were doing, and so he stumbled across us. So I think there's some amount of just like making yourself visible is super helpful, so that the right kind of people find you. And then I think having investors that understand the journey of a founder and are supportive of the journey of a founder, I think, is really important, because there are some investors who look at this as just a pure financial instrument, right? Like, I'm putting money in and I expect to take money out.
Right.
And every investor is financially motivated in that direction. But a lot of investors don't do VC because of the financial opportunity. They do it because of the opportunity to build new companies and support entrepreneurs in their path, in path of their journey. And those are the right kind of people, because every startup is a roller coaster and goes through ups and downs. And the purely financially motivated investor during a down might look at it and say, this is all screwy, and like, we need to change strategy, or we need a new CEO or something like that. Right? And that's what you want to avoid. You want a founder, an investor who sees the down and says, no worries, this is what happens. This is what startups are about. Now, of course, we want to recover from the down, but like, we will, and we're going to have ups too. And that's just part of the journey of building a company.
So what have you learned personally over the last couple of years that's made you a better founder today?
I've learned how to build a team, how to engage that team, how to encourage them to be their best selves, and how to help people grow. I think at the end of the day, that's the most valuable skill that a founder can have. And it's a different skill than what you need from day one. Like when there's just 4 people, like you don't think of your job as team building. You think of your job as like, get things done, and get the other 3 people to get things done too. But when it scales, it really becomes all about the team and all about figuring out how to get the team pointed in the right direction, and how to get the team working together well, and how to identify skill gaps on the team and fill those either by helping somebody learn a new skill or by hiring a new person. And those are the things that I've learned that I think have made me effective at the scale that we're at now.
So I work with a lot of early stage companies. I mean, even a lot of entrepreneurs that are just still in that idea phase. And one of the big dilemmas is they know they think they have a good product. They think there's a fit there, there's a market, but they just don't know what the hell to do. Like they're scared because, they didn't learn how to build a company in school. I mean, there's no playbook. I mean, I guess there's books and blogs and everything else that you can read to try to learn from other people's mistakes. But at a certain point, you just have to do it. I mean, so
Right.
what playbook have you followed? I mean, or is it just surround yourself with great people, take risks? I mean, how have you, finagled your way through this?
Yeah. So, I mean, I definitely prescribe to the lean startup approach. Fail fast and experiment, and that there's a science to building, that building a startup isn't an art, it's a science. It's just a different science than running a large company. And the science is about running lots of experiments until you hit the thing that works. I think that ideas are somewhat useless on their own because they're as likely to be wrong as they are right. And what helps you figure that out is putting it in front of a customer and having them tell you what they think about it. So figuring out whether you have a good idea is about getting something in front of a customer as fast as possible. I think that as far as sort of early days, like if there's stuff that needs to get done to prove product market fit or prove whether what you've got is appealing to a customer, like, okay, someone needs to build a website, someone needs to build an app, someone needs to build in our case, a physical device. I think you just got to, learn it and do it. Like I taught myself to code. And that took a little while, but it was a valuable investment of time. And now it's an incredibly useful skill. And so it's worth it. And I think that that's something that a lot of people don't see in themselves is they see skills that are necessary and they say, well, I'm not an engineer, so I'm not going to be able to do that. And that's where people get stuck and they go and try and find an engineer to work on it. But engineers have lots of opportunities. So they're really hard to convince to work on something, especially if you're not technically competent yourself. And so just do it, just learn, like buy a book, watch some YouTube videos. There's nothing you can't learn by just sitting down and like Googling stuff and taking classes online and
Listening to podcasts.
and listening to podcasts. Yeah. So
lots of resources.
Yeah. You just gotta spend the time and invest in learning first before you then go try and build something.
Just a couple more questions for you. What is your favorite thing about being an entrepreneur? And then what is your least favorite thing about being an entrepreneur?
My favorite thing is watching people grow. Like some of our early employees who started with relatively small roles, relatively sort of narrow focuses that have developed into leaders and people that are going to run their own companies one day. That's a really cool feeling because it's one of these, like, when you run a startup, you have a little bit of a feeling of like one day this will all fall apart. That like I've managed to convince the world that we're doing something interesting for like a little while, but one day everyone will figure out that that we're wrong, and then it'll all come crumbling down. But if that happens, I've helped some amazing people grow, and they'll go do amazing things, and I'm going to take partial credit for the awesome things they do one day.
Absolutely.
And my least favorite thing is, I don't like fundraising is such an important part of the job. I don't love fundraising. It's just not that fun. You get a lot of no's, and it's not why no one starts a company so they can go raise money. You start a company to build something cool, and every day you're raising money, you're not building something cool.
How much time, like when you guys were in that fundraising mode, what percentage of your time do you think was allocated to fundraising?
Oh, it's full time
Jesus.
without question. Yeah, I mean, I basically had to take all of my other responsibilities and pass them off to other people in the team
Wow,
for 3 to 6 months while I raise.
that's
Um,
insane.
yeah, it's crazy, and it's funny because you look at it and you're like, you can't even figure out where the time goes. You're like, well, raising is like I have to make a deck, a presentation, and I put it in front of a VC, and we talk for an hour, and then we do that like 3 or 4 more times, and then we're done. So like, how could this take 3 months full time? And
Right.
somehow it does.
How does that process change, right? I mean, because that is just so unproductive of your time. I mean,
Yeah.
I know AngelList is changing it to a certain degree, but at some point, I mean, that model is just broken where CEOs and founders are spending months and hundreds of hours fundraising. I mean, just
Well,
screwed up.
yeah. I mean, I think that it's investing in VC is so much of a people game. Like,
True. True.
there's only so much you can do to like turn your financials into like something that somebody can run through an Excel model to figure out whether it's a good investment or not. Like,
Right.
that's not how the early stage stuff works. So at the end of the day, like,
Can't really apply AI and bots to the investing.
yeah, exactly. It's an interview. I'm basically going through like deep interviews that are, I think, they're commensurate with the amount of money they're putting in me, right?
Yeah, it's like dating. Yep.
Yeah, if you're gonna write it's like getting married. You're gonna
Yep.
write me a $10 million check, and you're gonna join my board. Like, you gotta really be into this.
Right. Right.
So,
They gotta love you.
right. So I think it's just part of the game, and it's just something that what one has to recognize if you're gonna start a company. Like, that's part of your life, and is that what you want to do, and is it what you're good at, and if you're not, like, is there someone else that's going to be a co-founder who's going to play that role? And they better have the CEO title, because the investors only want to talk to the CEO. And what I've been grateful for is I've got a great executive team. So when I have to step out and fundraise for 3 months, I have great people I can turn around to and say, okay, here's all the stuff I do right now. I need you to do this, and you to do this, and you to do this, so I can stop being CEO for 3 months. We actually called it, the first time I did this, my team called it Voltron CEO. They're like, well, Zach is CEO, but for now he's not CEO anymore. So now we have Voltron CEO, which is like the 4 other people in my executive team acting as a group as CEO. And that worked really well.
If you could go back to 6 months before you started this company, what advice would you give to yourself?
Oh boy. I don't know, everything. So the last, a couple months ago, I said to one of our investors, I was like, every time I do something, it's super hard because it's the first time I've done it. And then afterwards, I look back and I'm like, man, I would do that way better the second time around. And at the end of it, I'm like, this is why investors like to invest in second-time founders.
Yep.
Because
Sure.
you figure everything out the first time, and it takes 6 months to do something the first time and 2 months to do it the second time. And so I keep thinking, like, man, second time I'm going to be awesome. So it's hard to say exactly what it is, except everything's going to take 3 times as long as you think it is. And everything's going to cost twice as much as you think it does. And everything's going to be harder than you think it is. And so just brace yourself, like, be ready for that. And it's just part of the job. It's part of the game. It's not a problem. It's what startups are.
Right. I mean, I was listening to an interview a couple days ago with Kamal Ravikant. I think that's how you pronounce his name. And that's what he said, is he loves to invest in second-time entrepreneurs because they've just learned so much on that first one, and they're not going to make those same mistakes again. And it's impossible not to make mistakes on your first one because there is no playbook for this stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Last question. If you were to sit down with someone looking to start a hardware or software company, what advice would you give to them?
Celebrate the wins. Yeah.
Okay.
Like, the starting a company is a roller coaster, and you have amazing days where everything goes well and huge important things happen. You raise a huge round of capital, or you get some really big important customer, or you ship your product for the first time. And then you have terrible days where an important employee quits, or you screwed something up that you have to go fix, or a customer's really pissed off. And it's really easy to get sucked into the bad days and like really have them affect you emotionally and kind of forget how great the good days are. And so, it's like when something awesome happens, because you get the new customer, the big new customer, and then you high five everybody, and then you get back to work.
Right.
So the advice is like celebrate it, right?
So
New customer.
how hard do you celebrate? I mean, we're talking like popping bottles of champagne, or
Yeah, exactly. Like champagne. Have a gong in the office that you ring every time something awesome happens. Like, shout it from the rooftops. Go out for drinks. Have fun. Like, do something as a team. Like, go out and go do what are some of the fun stuff we've done as a team? Like, go do a cooking class. Like, do something fun to celebrate when you have good days, so that so that at the end of the day you look back on it and you say, like, this has been really fun and a great experience.
right? I think it's a good point. I don't do that myself, and I probably should.
I think probably
it's
I think everyone
forward
probably
to, and
under celebrates.
it does distract you a little bit from the business, because I mean, sometimes it is just go, 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 when you really don't take a deep breath to kind of look back on all the good stuff you've done. You just look forward to all the stuff you still have to do.
Right. Yeah. Well, it always feels like it's a sprint, and that you're just about to get around the corner, and then you can like chill out for a bit. And 5 years later, you realize it's a marathon. And if you've been sprinting too hard, then you're dead and exhausted. It's like you got to take breaks. You got to relax. You got to make it sustainable, because it's going to feel like that the whole way.
I'll ask one last question, and then we'll wrap it up. But looking forward 3 or 4 years, I know this is really hard because that feels like an eternity in the startup world. But do you think you'll still be an independent company, or do you guys think you'll be an ideal acquisition target for a larger company looking to add this type of a platform to their suite?
I think it's a bit hard to say, because at the end of the day, what I see for Particle is we can be for the Internet of Things what Android was for smartphones and what Windows was for PCs. And that's a huge opportunity. And it's a huge opportunity for us, and it's a huge opportunity for big companies in this space who want to play that role as well. So we're on the path to do it on our own.
Awesome.
And we've got plans to get us there and go the whole journey on our own. And if one day somebody shows up and says, you know what, I think you guys are doing something really smart, and I'm going to give you all the resources that you need to get there faster. That's very possible that'll happen at some point. So that's kind of the attitude that I take, is like, we're going big, regardless of how we get there, and we'll just figure out what the best path is.
Wonderful. Sounds like you guys are on your way. Well, let's end it there, man. I want to thank you so much. This has been an absolutely phenomenal interview. So much advice shared. I really appreciate it. What's the best way for our audience to connect with you or the company?
Yeah. So anyone's feel free to reach out to me. My email address is zach@particle.io. If there's anything I can do to be helpful. And if you want to learn more about Particle, our website is www.particle.io.
Awesome. Thank you so much, man. Want to wish you a happy new year. Hopefully 2017 is even better than 2016. And if I'm ever out in the Bay Area, definitely have to connect and grab some coffee.
Thanks. Great. Sounds great. Absolutely.
Talk to you soon, Zach. Take care.
Take care.